The summer heat pressed down on Amarillo, Texas, like a heavy blanket that July morning in 1998. Marcus Rivera adjusted his rearview mirror one more time, watching his two cousins pile camping gear into the back of his red Ford Bronco. At 22, Marcus was the oldest of the three and had been planning this camping trip to Palo Duro Canyon for months. His younger cousins Danny, 19, and Sophia, 18, had been looking forward to escaping the suffocating small-town atmosphere of their hometown near the Oklahoma border. "You sure you packed enough snacks, Sophia?" Danny teased, hefting a cooler that seemed far too heavy for a 3-day trip. Sophia rolled her eyes, her dark hair catching the morning light as she secured a tarp over their supplies. The three had grown up together, practically siblings, after Sophia's parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Marcus's family had taken her in without question, and the bond between the cousins had only grown stronger over the years. Marcus checked his watch, 8:47 a.m. on July 15, 1998. They planned to drive the 2 hours south to Palo Duro Canyon State Park, set up camp, and spend 3 days hiking the rugged trails that carved through the second-largest canyon in the United States. It was Sophia's graduation gift to herself before starting college in the fall, and Danny's break from his job at the local grain elevator. Before we continue with this story, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this one. The Bronco rumbled to life, and Marcus waved goodbye to his mother, who stood on the front porch of their modest ranch house, coffee mug in hand. She had that look mothers get when their children venture into the world, proud but worried. "Drive safe," she called out, and Marcus gave her a thumbs up through the window. The drive south took them through endless stretches of Texas Panhandle, where the horizon seemed to go on forever and the sky dominated everything. They passed through small towns with names like Claude and Happy, places where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed. Danny rode shotgun, fiddling with the radio to find a decent country station, while Sophia sprawled in the back seat, reading a paperback novel she'd picked up at the Walmart in town. "Remember when we used to come out here as kids with Grandpa Joe?" Sophia asked, looking up from her book as they passed a weathered billboard advertising a roadside diner. Marcus smiled, remembering those summers when their grandfather would load them into his old Chevy truck and drive them out to fish in the small creeks that fed into the Red River. "He always said this land would teach you things about yourself if you knew how to listen," Marcus replied, downshifting as they approached the canyon entrance. The landscape had begun to change, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills, dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. They arrived at Palo Duro Canyon State Park just after 11 a.m., paying their entrance fee at the small ranger station. The ranger, a weathered man in his 60s named Bill Hendricks, checked their camping permit and gave them the standard warnings about rattlesnakes, flash floods, and staying on marked trails. "You'll be careful out there," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen his share of weekend adventurers get into trouble. "Weather Service is calling for possible storms later in the week." The campsite they'd reserved was in the Fortress Cliff area, a section of the park known for its towering red rock formations and relatively secluded location. As they drove deeper into the canyon, the walls rose around them like ancient cathedrals, painted in layers of red, orange, and yellow stone that told the story of millions of years of geological history. Marcus parked the Bronco near their designated site, and the three cousins spent the afternoon setting up camp. They pitched 2 tents, Marcus in one, Danny and Sophia sharing the larger one, and arranged their cooking supplies around a stone fire ring. The July heat was intense, but the canyon walls provided some shade, and a slight breeze carried the scent of sage and juniper. That evening, they cooked hamburgers over an open fire and shared stories about their plans for the future. Danny talked about maybe joining the military after working another year to save money. Sophia was excited about studying education at West Texas A&M, dreaming of becoming a teacher. Marcus, who'd been working at his uncle's auto repair shop since high school, wasn't sure what came next, but was content to take life as it came. As darkness fell, the canyon transformed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees, and stars appeared in numbers that city dwellers never see. They built up the fire, and Marcus pulled out his guitar, playing songs they'd grown up hearing on the radio. Sophia's voice harmonized with his on an old Willie Nelson tune, while Danny kept rhythm by tapping on an empty beer bottle. "This is perfect," Sophia said, looking up at the Milky Way stretching across the clear sky. "I'm going to miss this when I'm stuck in some dorm room studying education theory." They stayed up until nearly midnight, talking and laughing, completely unaware that this would be their last night together. The next morning brought clouds rolling in from the west, but nothing that looked immediately threatening. Marcus had planned an ambitious hike to the canyon rim, a challenging trail that would take most of the day. They packed light: water, trail mix, a first aid kit, and a disposable camera Sophia had brought to document their adventure. The trail started easily enough, following the canyon floor along a dry creek bed lined with cottonwood trees. But as they climbed higher, the path became more demanding, switching back and forth up steep grades covered in loose rock and thorny brush. Danny, who'd been complaining about the heat, started to lag behind. "Maybe we should turn back," he suggested around noon as they stopped to rest in the shade of a large boulder. The clouds had thickened, and the air had that heavy electric feel that often precedes a Texas thunderstorm. "We're more than halfway there," Marcus argued, checking his compass and the trail map they'd picked up at the ranger station. "Another hour, and we'll be at the rim. The view will be worth it." Sophia sided with Marcus, and Danny reluctantly agreed to continue. They pressed on, the trail becoming increasingly narrow and exposed as it wound along ledges carved into the canyon walls. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and the wind was picking up, causing the sparse vegetation to rustle and bend. It was around 2 p.m. when they heard the first rumble of thunder, still distant, but clearly moving their direction. Marcus checked the sky and made a decision that would haunt the investigation for years to come. Instead of turning back immediately, he suggested they take shelter under a large rock overhang he'd spotted about a quarter-mile ahead. "We can wait out the worst of it there," he said, shouldering his pack. "No point in getting caught in the open if this thing really opens up." The overhang turned out to be larger than they'd expected, more of a shallow cave carved into the red sandstone. They huddled inside as the storm arrived with typical Texas intensity, lightning crackling across the sky, thunder echoing off the canyon walls, and rain falling in sheets that turned the trail they'd just climbed into a temporary waterfall. "Good call," Danny said, unwrapping a granola bar. "This beats getting soaked." Sophia had her camera out, trying to capture lightning strikes against the dramatic backdrop of the canyon walls. The storm lasted about 45 minutes, then moved on as quickly as it had arrived. The air was cooler and surprisingly clear, washed clean by the rain. They emerged from their shelter to find the trail muddy but passable, and decided to continue to the rim as planned. What happened next remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. According to the timeline investigators would later reconstruct, the three cousins should have reached the canyon rim around 4 p.m. The trail they were following was clearly marked, and despite the recent rain, well established. It was a route that hundreds of hikers completed successfully each year. But Marcus, Danny, and Sophia Rivera never made it to the rim. They simply vanished somewhere between the rock overhang where they'd waited out the storm and their intended destination, a stretch of trail less than a mile long that offered no obvious places where three people could disappear without a trace. Back at the campground, their absence wasn't immediately noticed. Other campers saw their tents and the Bronco parked at the site and assumed the three were out hiking. It wasn't until the next morning, when a park maintenance worker noticed that their campfire had been cold for hours and no one answered when he called out a greeting, that concern began to grow. Ranger Bill Hendricks was the first official to investigate. He found their campsite exactly as they'd left it the morning before, food still in the cooler, sleeping bags laid out in the tents, toiletries arranged on a folding table. The only things missing were the day packs they'd taken on their hike and the three young people themselves. It looked like they'd just stepped away for a minute, Hendricks would later tell investigators. Coffee pot was still on the camp stove, like they'd planned to come back for lunch. A search was launched immediately. Park rangers, local law enforcement, and volunteers combed the canyon trail system. They found footprints in the mud from the previous day's storm, prints that matched the boots Marcus had been wearing. The trail led up toward the rim, just as expected, but then seemed to simply end about 3/4 of a mile from the campsite. "It was the strangest thing," said Detective Ray Kowalski of the Randall County Sheriff's Department, who took over the investigation when it became clear this was more than a simple case of hikers taking a wrong turn. The prints were clear in the mud, for maybe half a mile, then nothing, like they just walked into thin air. Search teams expanded their efforts, bringing in tracking dogs, helicopters, and technical rescue specialists familiar with the canyon's treacherous terrain. They searched every cave, every ledge, every possible place where three people might have fallen or taken shelter. Local volunteers who knew the area joined the effort, hiking trails and exploring areas that weren't on any official map. The search continued for 2 weeks, one of the largest missing person operations in Texas Panhandle history. But despite covering hundreds of square miles and following up on dozens of reported sightings, investigators found no additional trace of Marcus, Danny, or Sofia Rivera. The case attracted media attention throughout Texas and beyond. The story of three close-knit cousins vanishing without a trace in one of America's most spectacular natural areas captured public imagination. Theories ranged from the plausible, they'd fallen into an unmapped cave system, to the far-fetched alien abduction or government cover-up. Marcus's mother, Elena Rivera, became the public face of the family's anguish. She appeared on local television stations, pleading for information and refusing to give up hope that her son and niece and nephew would be found alive. "They're good kids," she said during one particularly emotional interview. "Smart, careful kids. Something happened to them out there, something they couldn't control." The investigation remained active for months, then years, but leads grew increasingly scarce. The FBI was brought in to examine the possibility of foul play, but found no evidence that the three had been victims of violence. Their personal belongings showed no signs of disturbance, and background checks revealed no enemies or reasons why anyone would want to harm them. Gradually, as is the way with such cases, public attention faded. The story moved from front pages to inside sections, then disappeared altogether, except for anniversary pieces that grew shorter each year. The families never stopped hoping, never stopped searching, but life had to go on. Danny's girlfriend, Michelle, waited 2 years before she started dating again. Sophia's best friend from high school, Carmen, kept Sophia's memory alive by volunteering at a local literacy program, something Sophia had been passionate about. Marcus's younger brother, Eduardo, took over some of the responsibilities at their uncle's auto shop, though he never stopped wondering what had happened to the brother who'd been his hero. The red Ford Bronco was eventually returned to the family and sat in Elena Rivera's driveway for several years, a painful reminder that she couldn't bring herself to get rid of. Occasionally, amateur investigators or true crime enthusiasts would contact the family with new theories or offers to help, but nothing ever came of these well-meaning efforts. As the years passed, The Rivera case became part of local folklore, a cautionary tale told around campfires, and a mystery that older residents would bring up whenever someone mentioned strange happenings in the canyon. Palo Duro State Park installed additional trail markers and improved their communication systems, but the canyon remained a wild place where people needed to respect the power of nature. Elena Rivera never remarried. She kept Marcus's room exactly as he'd left it, and every July 15th, the anniversary of their disappearance, she would drive out to Palo Duro Canyon and leave flowers at the trailhead where her son and his cousins had begun their final hike. Park rangers grew to know her and would always stop to talk, sharing any new theories or developments in the case. "Time doesn't heal everything," she told a reporter during the 5th anniversary of the disappearance. "Some wounds just get older, but they don't get better." The breakthrough came in 2013, 15 years after the disappearance, and from a completely unexpected source. Jake Morrison, a geology student at Texas Tech University, was conducting a survey of limestone formations in the remote northern section of Palo Duro Canyon for his master's thesis. The area he was studying was well off the established trail system, accessible only by rope and requiring technical climbing skills. Morrison was rappelling down a narrow side canyon that most visitors never even noticed when he spotted something that didn't belong in the natural landscape. About 200 feet below the rim, wedged in a cleft between two massive boulders, was what appeared to be the rusted remains of a vehicle. "At first I thought it might be some old mining equipment," Morrison later told investigators, "but as I got closer, I could see it was definitely a car, and it looked like it had been there for a long time." The vehicle was a red Ford Bronco, its paint faded and body dented from years of exposure to the elements. More importantly, the license plate, though partially obscured by debris, was still legible. A quick radio call to park headquarters confirmed what Morrison had begun to suspect. This was the missing vehicle from the Rivera case. The recovery operation took 3 days and required specialized equipment to extract the Bronco from its precarious position in the canyon. When investigators were finally able to examine the vehicle properly, they found clear evidence that Marcus, Danny, and Sophia had been inside when it went over the edge. Personal items were scattered throughout the interior: Sophia's camera, with film that was still partially salvageable, Danny's wallet, Marcus's guitar pick. More significantly, forensic examination revealed human remains in what had been the driver's seat, though 15 years of exposure to the elements made positive identification challenging. The evidence suggests they were attempting to drive out of the canyon when something went wrong. Detective Kowalski, now retired but brought back as a consultant on the case, explained to the media. "There are tire tracks leading up to the edge that indicate they may have been trying to navigate around a washout from that storm." The discovery answered some questions, but raised others. How had 3 experienced hikers ended up driving their vehicle in such a remote and dangerous area? The location, where the Bronco was found, was miles from any established road, accessible only by off-road trails that were barely passable even in good weather. Further investigation revealed that the area had been used by local ranchers in earlier decades as a route to move cattle between pastures, but had been largely abandoned by the 1990s due to erosion and the difficulty of maintaining the rough track. It was possible that the 3 cousins, disoriented by the storm and possibly lost, had attempted to use this old route to find their way back to the main road. "We may never know exactly what happened in those final hours," said Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a forensic anthropologist who examined the remains, "but it appears they died together, which suggests they were trying to help each other survive whatever situation they found themselves in." The discovery brought both closure and fresh pain to the Rivera family. Elena Rivera, now in her 70s, was finally able to hold a proper funeral for her son and his cousins. The service was held at St. Anthony's Catholic Church in their hometown, the same church where all three had been baptized. "At least now we know," Elena said during the service, her voice steady despite her tears. "They didn't suffer, and they were together. That's something." The case officially closed in 2014, but it left lasting impacts on everyone involved. The Park Service implemented new safety protocols and improved trail marking in remote areas. Jake Morrison, whose discovery had solved the 15-year mystery, completed his geology degree and went on to work for the National Park Service, partly inspired by his role in the Rivera case. Detective Kowalski used the case as a teaching example in lectures about missing person investigations, emphasizing the importance of never giving up hope and the value of advances in forensic technology. 15 years ago, we didn't have the tools to safely access that part of the canyon, he would tell audiences. Sometimes you have to wait for technology to catch up with the mystery. The story of Marcus, Danny, and Sofia Rivera became part of the permanent record of Palo Duro Canyon, a reminder that even in our modern world, nature still holds secrets, and that sometimes the most ordinary decisions can lead to extraordinary consequences. Their names were added to a memorial wall at the Park Visitor Center, along with others who had lost their lives in the canyon over the years. On quiet summer evenings, when the wind moves through the canyon walls and the shadows grow long across the red stone formations, some visitors swear they can hear voices carried on the breeze. Young voices, laughing and talking, as if three cousins were still out there somewhere, hiking the eternal trails of one of America's most beautiful and dangerous landscapes. The red Ford Bronco, after serving as evidence in the closed case, was finally released to the family. Elena Rivera made the decision that her son would have wanted. She donated it to a local community college's automotive program, where students learning to be mechanics could practice their skills on the vehicle that had carried three young dreams into the canyon one summer day in 1998. In the end, the mystery of the Rivera cousins became more than just a missing persons case. It became a story about family, about the bonds that hold us together even in the face of the unknown, and about the way love persists even when those we love are lost to us forever. Their disappearance changed everyone it touched, but perhaps most importantly, it reminded people that in the vast spaces of Texas, human connections matter more than anything else, and that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones we take with the people who know us best. The canyon keeps its secrets, but this one at least had finally been revealed. Years later, as the memory of the Rivera case began to fade from daily conversation, other mysteries emerged from the Texas Panhandle that would eventually connect in ways no one could have predicted. The discovery of Marcus, Danny, and Sofia's Bronco in 2013 had provided closure to one family, but it also opened questions about other disappearances in the region that had never been fully explained. Detective Ray Kowalski, now officially retired but still consulting on cold cases, kept a detailed map in his home office marked with red pins, indicating unsolved disappearances dating back to the 1970s. The Rivera case had been one of those pins until 2013, but even after their tragic end was discovered, Kowalski found himself studying the pattern of other vanishings in the vast expanse of the Texas Panhandle. In 2015, 2 years after the Bronco was found, another case caught his attention. Maria Santos, a geological survey specialist working for the Texas Department of Transportation, had been conducting routine soil stability tests along remote sections of Interstate 27 when she made an unusual discovery. About 15 miles northeast of the location where the Rivera cousins had died, Santos found what appeared to be the remnants of an old mining operation hidden in a narrow canyon that didn't appear on any official maps. It wasn't just the mining equipment that was strange, Santos later told investigators. It was how well hidden the whole operation was. You could drive right past the canyon entrance and never know it was there unless you were specifically looking for it. The site contained rusted machinery, the foundations of several small buildings, and what appeared to be deliberate attempts to camouflage the entire area. More disturbing was Santos's discovery of personal items scattered throughout the site: a woman's watch, fragments of clothing, and what looked like the remains of camping equipment. Santos reported her findings to local authorities, but the remote location and lack of obvious criminal activity meant the discovery received limited investigation. The items were collected and stored, but without a clear connection to any specific missing persons case, they remained in evidence storage. It wasn't until 2017 that the significance of Santos's discovery became clear. Jake Morrison, the geology student who had found the Rivera Bronco, was now working as a park ranger at Palo Duro Canyon and had maintained an interest in the area's history. During a conversation with Detective Kowalski about unsolved cases, Morrison mentioned that he'd heard rumors from older ranchers about illegal mining operations in the region during the 1990s. "My grandfather used to run cattle through some of those back canyons," Morrison said. "He always said there were places where the cattle wouldn't go, areas that gave them the spooks. He figured it was natural predators, but now I wonder if there wasn't something else going on." This conversation prompted Kowalski to take another look at the evidence from Santos's discovery. Using new forensic techniques not available in 2015, investigators were able to extract DNA from some of the personal items. The results were startling. The DNA matched profiles from 3 different missing persons cases spanning from 1995 to 1999. One match was particularly significant. The woman's watch contained traces of DNA that matched Julie Wilkinson, a 37-year-old environmental scientist who had disappeared in 1998 while conducting water quality tests near the Red River. Wilkinson's case had received little attention at the time, as she was known to work alone in remote areas, and her disappearance wasn't reported until she failed to return from what was supposed to be a 3-day field trip. Armed with this new evidence, law enforcement agencies coordinated a more thorough investigation of the hidden canyon site. What they uncovered was evidence of a sophisticated operation that had been active for at least a decade, possibly longer. Soil tests revealed traces of uranium processing, and geological surveys showed that the canyon sat atop a natural uranium deposit that had never been officially recorded. "Someone was running an illegal uranium mining operation," explained Dr. Rebecca Harrison, a geologist brought in to consult on the case. "The location was perfect, remote, hidden, and sitting on top of what appears to be a fairly rich deposit. In the 1990s, with increased environmental regulations, it would have been nearly impossible to get permits for this kind of operation. The investigation revealed that the mining operation had been sophisticated enough to process raw uranium ore into yellowcake, a concentrated form of uranium that could be sold on the black market for substantial sums. The equipment found at the site, though old and rusted, showed signs of having been operated by people with significant technical knowledge. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered evidence suggesting that multiple people had disappeared in connection with this operation over the years. In addition to Julie Wilkinson and the Rivera cousins, forensic evidence pointed to at least 4 other individuals who had likely encountered the mining operation and paid for the discovery with their lives. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. In 2018, a man named Robert Harlow was arrested in New Mexico on federal charges related to illegal uranium smuggling. During his interrogation, Harlow revealed that he had been part of a family operation that had run illegal mining sites throughout the Southwest during the 1990s and early 2000s. "We had a site in the Texas Panhandle," Harlow told federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. "My older brother Carl ran that operation. It was supposed to be temporary, just until we could find buyers for the processed material, but it ended up running for almost 10 years. According to Harlow, the operation had been financially successful, but had become increasingly dangerous as environmental regulations tightened and law enforcement began paying more attention to illegal mining activities. The family had made the decision to shut down the Texas site in 2000, but not before several people had stumbled upon their operation. "Carl was paranoid about getting caught," Harlow continued. "When people found the site, he wouldn't take chances. He said it was better to make problems disappear than to risk 20 years in federal prison." Harlow's testimony provided investigators with the names and locations of other family members involved in the operation. Carl Harlow had died in 2003, taking the specific details of the Texas operation with him, but other family members were still alive and could be questioned. The investigation expanded to include federal agencies, given the involvement of uranium smuggling and the possibility of connections to international buyers. FBI Special Agent Diana Reeves was assigned to coordinate the multi-agency task force, bringing resources and expertise that local law enforcement couldn't match. "What we're looking at is potentially one of the longest-running criminal enterprises in Texas history," Agent Reeves explained during a press conference announcing the expanded investigation. "This operation was responsible for multiple murders over nearly a decade, all to protect what was essentially a family business built on illegal mining and nuclear materials smuggling." The task force's work revealed the full scope of the Harlow family's activities. They had operated similar sites in Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado, always choosing remote locations where discovery was unlikely. The Texas site had been particularly valuable because of the high quality of the uranium deposit and its proximity to transportation networks that could move processed materials to buyers. DNA evidence and testimony from Robert Harlow eventually linked the family operation to 9 different disappearances in the Texas Panhandle between 1995 and 1999. In addition to the Rivera cousins and Julie Wilkinson, victims included a pair of hikers from Oklahoma, a local rancher who'd been checking on his cattle, and 2 college students who'd been exploring back roads during spring break. "They were systematic about it," Agent Reeves said. "Anyone who found the site and couldn't be bought or intimidated was eliminated. They would dispose of the bodies at various locations around the mining site, then use equipment to disturb the areas and make it look like natural erosion or animal activity." The investigation also revealed why the Rivera cousins had ended up so far from their planned hiking route. According to evidence pieced together from their recovered belongings and testimony from Robert Harlow, the 3 had encountered men from the mining operation on their second day in the canyon. Instead of being killed immediately, they had been taken to the mining site, possibly because Carl Harlow was away, and his subordinates weren't sure how to handle the situation. The cousins had apparently escaped from the mining compound during the night, taking their vehicle in a desperate attempt to reach help. Their route had taken them along the old cattle trail that connected the mining site to the main canyon area, but the rough terrain and their unfamiliarity with the area had led to the accident that killed them. "They came so close to getting away," Detective Kowalski reflected. "If they had known the area better, or if they had been just a little luckier with the weather, they might have made it to safety." The discoveries also explained some of the strange aspects of the original search for the Rivera cousins. The footprints that had seemed to disappear had actually led to the mining site, but search teams had never explored that area because it was so far from the established trail system. The mining operations security personnel had been watching the search efforts and had taken steps to eliminate any evidence that might lead investigators in their direction. By 2019, federal prosecutors had built cases against 7 surviving members of the Harlow family and their associates. The charges included multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, violation of environmental protection laws, and illegal trafficking of nuclear materials. The trials would continue for several years, but the evidence was overwhelming. For the families of the victims, the revelations brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief. Elena Rivera, now in her late 70s, attended every day of the trial proceedings related to her son and his cousins. "I always knew something terrible had happened to them," she told reporters outside the courthouse. "But knowing they tried to escape, knowing they were fighting to come home right until the end, that gives me some peace." The investigation also led to the discovery of remains at other sites operated by the Harlow family, bringing closure to families across the Southwest who had spent decades wondering what had happened to their loved ones. The FBI estimated that the family's various operations had been responsible for at least 25 deaths over a 15-year period. The environmental damage caused by the illegal mining operations proved to be extensive and long-lasting. The Texas site alone required a federal cleanup effort costing millions of dollars, and the contamination had affected groundwater supplies used by several small communities in the area. Some families had to abandon wells that had been used for generations. "The Harlow family didn't just destroy individual lives," said Dr. Harrison, the consulting geologist. "They contaminated the land and water that entire communities depended on. The environmental impact will be felt for decades." The case also prompted changes in how missing persons investigations are conducted in remote areas. The Texas Department of Public Safety developed new protocols for coordinating searches across agency boundaries and established better communication systems for tracking patterns of disappearances in wilderness areas. Jake Morrison, whose discovery of the Rivera Bronco had started the chain of events leading to the uncovering of the mining operation, was promoted to head of security for the Texas State Park System. His experience with the case made him an expert in search and rescue operations in challenging terrain. "The most important lesson from all of this," Morrison said, "is that we can never assume someone has just gotten lost or made a mistake. Sometimes there are people out there who mean harm, and we have to be prepared to look for evidence of that, even in places where it seems impossible." The Rivera case and its connection to the Harlow mining operation became the subject of several documentaries and true crime books. The story captured public attention not just because of its complexity, but because it demonstrated how ordinary people could become victims of criminal enterprises they never knew existed. Detective Kowalski, now in his 80s, maintained his office map with its red pins until his death in 2021. By then, most of the pins had been replaced with small American flags, indicating cases that had been solved. The Rivera case was marked with a special gold star, representing not just a solved case, but one that had led to justice for many other families. Ray never stopped believing that every pin on that map represented someone who deserved justice, said his daughter at his funeral. "He taught all of us that giving up on someone is the same as forgetting they ever lived." The hidden canyon, where the mining operation had been located, was eventually turned into a memorial site. The Texas Historical Commission placed a marker there listing the names of all the victims of the Harlow family's criminal enterprise. The site was also designated as an environmental education area, where visitors could learn about the long-term effects of illegal mining and the importance of protecting natural resources. Elena Rivera lived to see the last of the Harlow family members sentenced, dying peacefully in her sleep in 2022 at the age of 84. Her obituary noted that she had spent the final years of her life advocating for families of missing persons and had helped establish a foundation that provided resources for long-term searches in remote areas. The red Ford Bronco that had carried Marcus, Danny, and Sofia Rivera to their deaths was eventually restored by students at the community college where Elena had donated it. The vehicle was displayed at the memorial site as a reminder of how three young people's weekend camping trip had accidentally uncovered one of Texas's most extensive criminal operations. On quiet evenings at Palo Duro Canyon, when the wind moves through the rock formations and carries the scent of sage across the ancient landscape, visitors sometimes pause at the memorial marker that lists the names of the Rivera cousins alongside the other victims of the Harlow mining operation. The marker serves as a reminder that even in the vastness of Texas, every disappearance matters, and that sometimes the most important discoveries come from people who refuse to stop looking for the truth. The story of Marcus, Danny, and Sofia Rivera had begun as a simple family tragedy, three cousins who went camping and never came home. But their disappearance and the eventual discovery of their fate had exposed a criminal enterprise that had operated in the shadows for years, claiming victims across the Southwest and leaving scars on the landscape that would take generations to heal. In the end, the three cousins had gotten their justice, and their deaths had brought justice to many others. It was not the ending their family had hoped for when they first disappeared on that summer day in 1998, but it was an ending that honored their memory and ensured that their story would be remembered not just as a tragedy, but as a catalyst for truth and accountability in the wild places where such things are often hardest to find.